is recording. But I ask you to think about who dreamed you here. I am the dream of my Nanny Washington, her thick thighs and her big eyes and her sweet potato pies. But who dreamed you here? And as you think about who dreamed you here, I ask you to take a collective deep breath on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Now release that breath. Allow dream to come into this space. The soft petals, the whispers, the clue into who we are today stands with us now. I sit on the edge of the river and I see my ancestors calling me to rest. I am the dream of rest. Feet are planted on the ground. My heart is solid. I am safe. I am the dream of. Ashe. Thank you.
Now I just gotta do like quick homework, give you why we're here, and then we'll jump into the conversation, the moderating stuff. So the Wallace House in Harperville, Alabama is a historical plantation home built in 1841 by Samuel Wallace, a War of 1812 veteran and cotton planter who enslaved nearly 100 people. Today it stands as a powerful site for racial reconciliation, offering a space where descendants of both the enslavers and the enslaved can engage in dialogue about their shared history. The house now hosts the Wallace Center of Arts and Reconciliation, where community members work towards healing and understanding through various artistic culture initiatives. The center is part of the Alabama Humanities Alliance Healing History Initiative, fostering discussion on the legacy of systematic injustice, supporting community-led projects that promote empathy and trust across Alabama. Today, we gather with 3 incredible artists who have harnessed the power of creativity to confront, reimagine this complex and painful history. In a place that once held nearly 100 Black men, women, and children in bondage, these artists move beyond the hard and difficult aspects of history, transforming them into opportunities for reflections, resilience, and remembrance. Through their work, they honor the voices of those ancestors, peoples whose stories we often don't know or hear. They also uplift the voices of the descendants, the keepers of memory and resilience. In our conversation today, we will explore how these artists have crafted pathways to healing by embracing the silent histories of the Wallace site. This work is a testament to the courage it takes to confront our past, shape our new narratives that honor those who came before us, and create a space for dialogue, agency, and transformation. So instead of just reading people's bios, what we're going to do, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourself and how you connected to the site, and then what was your medium of telling this story. So I'll start with Elizabeth.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Elizabeth Webb. I'm an artist and filmmaker. I am connected to the Wallace Center because I was invited to do an installation there. The medium that we chose together with Salaam, sculpture theoretically, but also community organizing.
Yes, I'm Salaam Green, and I'm the poet laureate for the city of Birmingham. Medium we chose was using our artistry towards communal healing and community organizing. I'm connected to the Wallace Center. I was invited in to do this project alongside Elizabeth, and later invited in to be a poet in residence. But I'm also a proud daughter of rural Alabama.
Well, good morning. I'm Tony Bingham. I'm an artist working with alternative photography and also sculpture. I'm so happy that my professor, George Beasley, is in the audience. I just feel so honored. Also, and his wife, Judy. So I was invited also to come in to help reimagine what could happen at this 1841 plantation that the owners wanted to do something different with. They didn't want to make it, could they have made it into a bed and breakfast? Sure, it looks fun for that.
Lots of fun.
So saw the possibilities of some racial healing if they could pull it off. And I guess we'll get into that as we go. Using the house, an 1841 plantation house that has descendants of the enslaved community still living there, and descendants of the enslavers. All still, it's the most interesting community that you can imagine. It's just down the road in Harpersville, Alabama. Those of you from Harpersville or who know about that place. So I'm glad to be a part of this.
And then, once again, I'm Lance. My background is civil rights museums. Coming from Detroit to be here with you all. It feels good to be back in the Deep South. I lived in Mississippi, traveled to Alabama often, so. But Tony asked or challenged me to ask this question this morning, really about grounding. You know, someone who's coming from a civil rights background, I intentionally went to those sites to experience and feel and try to get grounded in that work so I can interpret that history. And so my question to the panelists, how have you become grounded at this site, right? A complex story of enslavers, right, and enslaved. And I'm sure the land, the house itself speaks. How do you all get grounded?
Okay, I wanted to answer it sort of not so scholarly, but just more like, I actually got a chance to go back to the Wallace house over the weekend. And I was just kind of trying to imagine what it would be like for you all, when you all, those who can make the bus trip, we're going there on Saturday. Being there, you can feel the history. You enter a place where you experience the eternity of time in the Coosa River, Yellowleaf Creek, the distant Flag Mountain, and stone from the Gant's marble quarry. In the trees, timbers cut long ago, transformed into a house still standing that remembers. You can feel it in the landscape, in the air, the light, the color. As you may try to imagine what this day would have felt like 180 years ago. Same colors, mountains, rivers, trees, landscape. Listening to the voices, observing how people navigated this same space with the resources that they had to work with. Imagine electricity yet to even be invented. Water from wells and rivers, light from sun and candles, heat from fireplaces, food from plantings stored in the root cellar, and freshly butchered cattle and fowl, also wildlife, deer, possums, turtles. The songs are eternal. The voices travel back and forth through time, and those songs enable us to be present in that 180-year-old space. Songs that connect us to the joys, the sorrows, the burdens, the sadness, the love, the faith, the color, the eternal unfolding of time. I'll close with, many of us gathered here have engaged in learning about the techniques for making, for molding, carving, and problem solving with materials. For me, the next step was equally important. it was making a decision to use my art background to make public art and finding a way to bring the public into the process.
Thank you. Can I borrow that? Take a picture of me. Grounding, I think it goes back to like, for me to define for myself what grounding really means. Like we have this hyper definition of grounding, but for me, it's how do I come back into the wholeness and the trueness of myself? And for me at the Wallace, it's been a challenge. And that doesn't mean that grounding is, I don't think grounding always is supposed to be something that's simple and easy and you just come into that. It's where your heart sometimes toggles with the past, the present, the future, and what's really happening in that space. So the people ground me when I think about Wallace. Most of my work centered around working with Black descendants. And it grounded me to be in the space with folks like a Peter Datcher, in his space. He reminded me of the grounding of my own grandfather. It's something as a Black woman just to be in the space with other Black people who don't want nothing, don't want you to do nothing, but just to be there with them. That's where I found my grounding. It was like, just Salaam, going over there. You know? They knew I was coming about poetry and they was like, okay. But just, going over there. And what grounded me, and I'll end with this, was being accepted into Harpersville and into the Black descendants family as if, I was one of their own. That grounded me. It's like, oh, y'all love me. I love y'all too. Y'all miss me? Oh, I miss y'all too. And then you say, well, what about the poetry? Well, isn't that what poetry is?
I want to borrow from both of y'all.
I'm taking
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I mean, similar to Tony, I am a person who thinks about, like following Saidiya Hartman and others, thinks about landscape as a witness to histories that exist outside of the archive. So I think that there are real ways that the mud trees hold all of these histories, right? And to be among them and if you listen, then you can hear some of them, but also, I mean, for me, I came into this space from outside. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, another complex place. But I have a lot of roots in Eastern Alabama, but I was not of this particular place, and I was invited to do this installation, but it was very important to me that I not do something that the descendant community didn't want. So I think for me, it was grounding in the relationship building, sitting on Peter's porch, which is not at the Wallace house. It's a ways away and it's a beautiful space, and just spending hours on that porch talking to Peter and talking to other Black descendants about reparations, ultimately, and sort of building family, building kinship networks. All of that was the grounding for me as well.
So this leads into my next question for all three of you. And to me, what I'm hearing, right, in this process, when you're doing organizing and grassroots work, the first thing you have to do is build trust with the community. They have to let you into the space, right? And so I commend you all three for allowing that space to take organically. You can't rush that. And so my question, art and activism often work hand in hand. That there's always challenges of sustainability for both the artists and the community that they serve. How do you ensure that your work not only sparks the conversation about race and history, but also leads to a lasting change, right? That's the first question. And then what role does community engagement play in that process? And how do you invite others to the ongoing dialogue? I know that was loaded. but I can ask it again. So, how do you ensure that your work not only sparks the conversation about race and history, but also leads to a lasting change? And then what role does community engagement play in this process? And how do you invite others to be part of that?
I'll do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you got it. You got it. We in conversation. You got it. It's really just us talking. You really don't see them.
Okay.
It's really us.
No, but some things that help me are to write things down that I want to say, so I want to just stand up here blubbering. I'm a blubber anyway, but, you know, but fortunately, it made me think of when you enter a place, a space, a community that you're not from, and you're bringing, you know, we're bringing what we know to make, we know we can make a thing, but then the challenge is how do we start to break it down to make something that's going to make sense for us and for the community? Are we even the right people to do it in that? You know, hopefully we are, but you know, because we're all good people, we have our heart is in the right place, but still, you know, that's something we have to I had to kind of think about. What is the appropriate response? So it was sort of, how do you even start? What symbols exist within the community that everyone is already familiar with, that would function as a reminder to the community, a community once torn apart by racial violence, but would serve as a positive reminder of their proud legacy at the same time. For me, it clicked for me during a search. I was looking for the site of this African-American church that had been burned down, right across the street from the Wallace house, not down, you know, a little bit over the hill. It was the Scotts Grove Baptist Church, which had been burned down by Klan-like individuals. I don't know.
Raise your hand. No.
Like individuals. Actually, some of you know Charles Logan, who comes to these conferences sometimes. He's from there, and he remembers as a child seeing the church burn. He was attending church just down the road there, and he saw the smoke. So he remembered that. So it was going to that site and then getting there and observing this daffodil field. I don't know how many of you all have ever tried to plant daffodils. They're very persnickety plants. But you plant them, you may just get leaves, and it may take a while for you to get blossoms. But imagine going to this field with like hundreds of daffodils in bloom, you know, and just seeing that, and it's like, you know, the sensitivity that all of us are. Right? Y'all have points for that. Imagining you're at the site of this church. Did each flower represent a song that was sung there, or a prayer that was uttered there? It's like Mother Nature was kind of in connection. You know, you feel that. It's those moments that help you feel like maybe it's okay for me to want to start thinking about making some work here. Then I asked the deacon who I was riding with, who'd shown me the spot. I was like, are there any pictures, any references to this? And he said, well, not very many, but there are two that everyone knows about. They rebuilt Scottsgrove Church. In their fellowship hall were these two photos, one of the family gathered at Easter, and another photo that showed some architectural references to the old church building. And that's when it kind of settled for me that I wanted to work with, see if I could find a way to work with those images to tell the story that I wanted to tell. I made my point, did I?
Yes.
Where's the hook? Okay. So, okay.
That's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as, the transformation and community engagement, I think, my first entree into the Wallace Center was working as a creative writing teacher, teaching writer for another program where, I taught poetry of place and prose poems to sixth graders at Vincent Elementary School, which is where, Harpersville children go to school. And I was to go into the sixth grade classroom and teach this 6-week curriculum on the enslaved, descendants, Black and white, of the Wallace Plantation and Wallace Center, Wallace Plantation. And, and part of that work was bringing in some of the living descendants to talk about their heritage with sixth graders. And my role was to see if I could teach empathy through poetry to the sixth graders. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
You know? Like, Noni, this is Harpersville. If you're familiar with Shelby County, it was maybe one student of color in the classroom, and then there was me. And we came into the classroom and it's like, oh, I'm gonna teach poetry already. You know, the kids are like, yeah, you know, we don't write pencils, you know, my hands hurt, you know, all that. But once we got through the hard part, that we don't have to use our iPads for everything, that we brought in local people to say, these are your neighbors. Have you passed by this White House on the corner? Do you know what that is? We're talking place, prose, you know, poetry place. This is what you see. Oh, some of you all have the last name ones. Your uncle and them, you know? And we began to have those conversations and we began to talk, and then we began to talk about, you know, the whole idea of the wagon trail. Fascinated about the whole idea of enslaved folks coming from Virginia, coming down this wagon trail and telling them these stories of the truth, and then asking them to write these poems about what they just heard. I saw some transformation in sixth graders towards empathy, towards, oh, Miss Green, when Mr. Datcher came in and talked about his great-great-grandfather, what have you, worked at the Wallace Center, Wallace House, for 50-odd years and never got paid. The sixth graders began to gasp and say, Miss Green, he didn't get paid $1. He didn't get paid nothing for 50 years. That ain't right, Miss Green. That didn't happen. That can't happen. I was like, write the poem. And whenever Mr. Datcher was standing there, they would just look at him, and every time they would ask a question, Peter would give them $1. To tell them that your work is worth it. And the transformation I saw was actually having an anthology with the poems from the sixth graders who wrote those poems that are fueled with empathy. I know we're looking for form, aren't we, in poems? I know we're saying, what type of poems did they write? I know, no, they wrote poems that were empathetic poems. Poems of reconciliation, poems of reclamation, poems of heart. So I think that's the difference I saw with the community of sixth graders that are also very important to the development of the Wallace Center going forward in Harpersville. Y'all get on the poet, clap for me. Well, all I like is, I need, put me on stage.
And now you all know why I wanted to collaborate with Salem. But yeah, no, I think that, I mean, going back to what you mentioned about trust building, I think that there is, like, everything from the beginning was grounded in community and real relationships. And when you're building like authentic relationships, then the community can guide you. And then that requires some like letting go of certain preconceived notions of what a project might become, and it's actually a challenge for the institution often. I started working on this project in 2018, and it sort of was dedicated this year. The institution of the center was not pleased by that length of time. I think because, you know, I mean, it's when you have grant deadlines and different things, it's like there are all these sort of falsely imposed benchmarks, and as an artist, you have to really kind of stand firm and like, no, like I'm moving at the speed of trust. I'm moving at the speed of our relationships. I'm moving at the speed of what other folks are interested in having happen in this space. And that often, goes against what the timeline is for others. But yeah, I mean, I think that we, again, I was invited to do an installation inside the house, and the institution itself was at a very sort of nascent stage, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that because the sort of groundwork of community building hadn't happened as much. And so I was like, well, I won't do that, but I will like have conversations with the Black descendant community around reparations and what community benefit could look like on this hyper local scale, and like what folks actually want from this newly created institution. So again, it was sort of, there was always this question of like, okay, cool, but like, what's the sculpture? And it's like, we'll find out. I don't know yet. We don't know yet. And so yeah, I mean, I think it requires a lot of intention to work in that way, and it requires some fortitude in a certain way sometimes.
Yeah, I have questions, but I'm also coming up with questions on the spot of what you all are saying. And it's what I've heard you say as artists, as creatives, we also have our own agency. Yeah. We have deadlines for these grants that we're supposed to meet, but the first step is to build community authentically. We can enter a space through art and we can leave, but that's not what we're trying to do. And so I would love for you all to talk more about that agency as creatives when you're entering in those spaces and saying, you can't do that work without doing this step first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you always have some sort of leverage. Like especially if you're invited in somewhere, it's like they ultimately, and I don't mean to pose this as like a false, like that the institution is necessarily always opposed to what one's doing, right? But there is a desire, like there's cultural capital in what we do as artists, and there's a reason that people want us to enter space. And so I think that, it's hard because it's often you're in the place of like, well, I'm not really getting paid anything for this work, or perhaps eventually will be paid, but one was paid eventually. But not for the amount of, anyway, it's fine. Yeah.
But I think what you're saying, right? Institutions usually have an idea of what they want.
Exactly.
And they misstep all the time. Right. And so I think you saying as an artist, as a creator, we also have agency, and it's our responsibility to also help guide them on that, is what I'm hearing you say. And yes, as someone who's in cultural work, we don't get paid. We didn't enter this job just to get paid, right? But we enter this work to, I think, number one, it's passion, and then leave an impact. And so what I'm hearing you saying, you do have agency, even though we may be struggling, we need to get that paycheck. Right, and so that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think entering into those spaces, the agency is, first of all, communicating and to whomever I'm working with or inviting into the space, is that you're getting a cultural worker who does reconciliatory, reclamation, regenerative, whatever the word is, practice, and I use poetry as an art form to interpret that. And they're like, well, can you just do a poem? It's the process. So first of all, as an artist, my agency is knowing that there are many, of course, poets who do come in and install, poems or perform poems or do spoken word or if you would like a stage performance. But my work and my agency is to come into the community as I'm invited into the community or invited into a process. That it will be a process. I will be working alongside my ethos, around, community, building and community regeneration. And out of that ethos will become the product, or will become the whatever is left there to regenerate the space. But the process for me, and when Elizabeth and I were there, and Tony as well, was, I mean, we've been together for a while, so, and we've been doing these interdisciplinary types of art practices in this one place. And it's really the process of our ethos that has really brought together the things that you're seeing on the screen now. So my agency is to always communicate that to folks I'm working with as well.
And emphasizing the process over the product is another difficult thing to do, because there's so much of our economies are product driven. And so to work in that way is, I believe, its own method of resistance and power building.
Yes.
You know, it's so interesting. I mean, I wanted to think about also just the process. How do you even come up with the shape that this thing is going to take? Blended with something that the community is going to value and maybe long-term actually take care of. I mean, I think the Wallace House is a very interesting place. There was a time when there was a dance performance group, maybe you all saw some of the performances, the Weidman Davis dance group. You can probably see them online somewhere. They're an African-American group that sort of seems to specialize in mining these old houses, old antebellum places for gestures that they would later incorporate into dance. So they had done this month-long dance residences back in right before COVID had hit, in using each room of the Wallace house as a performance space. And you know, one of the things that struck me, and again, this was my quest for what's going to motivate me, what's going to connect the dots for me to begin thinking about what might emerge from this. So part of the Weidman Davis performance was the reading of the 1833, 1855 Alabama Slave Code. And that's the document that's available online. As I heard them read that, I was like, hey, what were people allowed to do? I mean,
Just a light reading.
And then I checked with one of the Mayor Theo Perkins, one of the members of the descendant community. I asked him, could African-American people, I mean, it seems like there were so many restrictions, could they practice their spiritual practices? And he said, yeah. They used to meet down in a grove, trees down in the back. That's where this name Scott's Grove Church came from. And so that motivated me to want to know more and perhaps investigate the possibility of recreating that place where they would meet. And so it made sense after the daffodil experience and the old photo recollection experience, that's what I sort of started thinking more towards, to create this place where the enslaved could maybe on Sundays go and have a day when they weren't working and that they could be by themselves. And I imagine that as being this space of, you know, do you think they're only praying when they get down there? I mean, isn't it possible they could have had conversations about escape, and even if they weren't in a setup they weren't because of family ties and connections, they themselves couldn't try to do such a thing? Couldn't they discuss so-and-so's meeting who's trying to make his way? You know, couldn't all those possibilities that could happen in such a space? So that motivated me. One of the things that motivated me toward that praise house experience.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say one more thing about it?
Yeah.
I always, whenever I think about that question, I think about like the cultural theorist Jeff Chang, and he always says that culture moves before policy, and then another mentor, Roberta Uno, sort of expanded upon that and said culture endures beyond politics. And so I think that there is this way in which is like cultural producers, there is, even in sort of moments of perhaps feeling powerless in a certain way, there is this way in which culture is inherently powerful and yeah.
Can you say those two again? Those
Oh.
quotes.
Culture moves before policy and culture endures beyond politics.
Thank you. Now we're gonna actually jump into the art itself, right? I think setting the background why community. This is for both you, Elizabeth and Salaam, right? How did the stories and voices of Black descendant community influence design and scope and structure of With Love and For Grief, especially with the elements that you all chose?
The background. Yeah, so as we spoke about a bit, the project really emerged from a series of conversations around reparations and around community benefit. So one of the conversations we had a couple of years ago was, it was on Juneteenth, and it was actually the first time that that we know about that only Black descendants gathered in the house. And the energy was palpably different than sort of the other times that many different folks had gathered there. And we had these really open and frank conversations about what folks wanted and what folks needed. And I remember one of the things that sort of came up then, actually there were two main themes that kind of emerged. One was a desire for formal permanent acknowledgement of the names of their enslaved ancestors. And another was scholarships for the local community, not just contained to the descendant community, but more broad. And so our challenge was sort of like, how do we kind of fulfill both of those needs in one project? And I remembered this story that Nell, the unknown caller, that Nell, one of the white descendants who had inherited the home, had told me early on, and she said that when she was little, she remembered seeing a bunch of names written on the four portico columns. So those four huge columns that were on the front of the house. And yeah,
Cue it up.
yeah, there you go. And I had always remembered that story, and it was the names of folks who had attended house parties there in the early 1900s, and one of the cousins of that place was actually Henry Walthall, who was the main actor in Birth of a Nation. And so he would bring a number of different folks in his network there, and they would have these sort of elaborate house parties, and they would all sign their names on those columns as a record of presence. And those specific columns had been removed during the restoration of the house because they had these huge rotten gaps in them. And I asked Nell where they were at the time, and she was like, "Oh, they're rotting in the back." And I was like, "Lift them off the ground immediately." No, no, we anyway. So we sort of tried to stop the rotting process, but started thinking about those columns and the names that they once held. Those names were sort of long erased, but thinking also about each of them as a tree. So each of those columns was originally a tree before it was felled to sort of support this plantation home. And thinking about all that the trees witnessed, all of the sort of history that they hold within them. And they had these huge rotten gaps in the center. And we spoke with the Black descendant community about what if we use these trees, and what if we sort of repurpose them to change that story of how they were once used to honor the names of the enslaved ancestors who built that place. And so we worked with Sloss furnaces to fill these rotten gaps with aluminum. And we wanted, actually Mayor Theo Perkins was the one who was adamant that he wanted a material that would be shiny. He wanted something shiny. So we were like, let's go metal. And that was also because we didn't want to cover up the fact that that these gaps existed. There was something that like, some folks were like, well, what if we you could kind of repair them, put wood in there and make it look good as new. And there was sort of a thought that maybe there was power in this idea of emphasizing the wound or the absence. And then, so once they were sort of filled in with that metal, we invited the descendant community to sign their own names onto the metal. And then I sort of engraved them over their signatures. And then we had a separate ceremony that was private just to the descendant community, where they wrote the names of their enslaved ancestors on those columns. And then in terms of the scholarship element of the project, that was a little bit more of a negotiation with the organization. That was something they were interested in, but it was, it's budget conversations are always complicated. And so we decided to make it a material of the sculpture. So that was sort of the way that we were like, well, it's just like the wood, it's just like the metal, scholarships are material in sculpture. And so they agreed to create a scholarship fund, the starting amount equal to the amount that they had invested in this material that begins to fill in the gaps. And I hope it is added to over time. I'll say that.
But it's a process.
The process.
We started the process this week. So we-
Started the process. Yeah, no, I think it's $5,000. It's
Almost 10.
oh, sorry. They added to it?
It's 10.
Less.
So
Cool. Appreciate you.
we gotta start somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yes, and my contribution was, Elizabeth asked, as I was invited into, Elizabeth asked me to support her in this process, as a collaborator, and kind of the unsexy work of going into community and having, community conversations or building dialogue around the conversations around everything from the reparations and what reparative work could look like, what this reparative process could look like. We had the conversation around this talk around Juneteenth, just kind of co-facilitating that process. Also process bringing ritual, because one of the biggest things as you're coming, for me as an artist coming into that space, honoring the people who lived in that space, honoring the enslaved descendants, and creating ritual around that, as well as creating ritual around the current living descendants. So that's kind of what my process was to bring together those two voices and collect in a collective one voice with the current Black descendants, the living Black descendants, and during that process to really talk about, okay, what do we want this sculpture to look like? Where do we want it placed? What is it going to mean? How do we want the names, carved on there? What kinds of materials? Really asking those conversations and then taking those conversations back to the co-founder, back to the organization, and then also for myself as a storyteller, listening to the other storytellers really helped me to inform exactly what types of stories we were going to tell and how we're going to tell those stories so that we can put those stories into the best artistic practice. So I think the word of the day is process. Process. We process this together in a collaborative way to make sure that, we were listening. And the sculptures that are created there today, and are there now, I think are a witness and a listening piece that the living Black descendants said, this is what we want for our reclamation of the land and the reclamation of those pillars.
And they were installed among the trees, among a little grove of trees, sort of adjacent to the house. So we wanted to sort of return them to their original purpose as trees before they were felled. But do you want to talk about the title a little bit, with love
Yes.
for grief?
Mhm.
So the title With Love for Grief We saw a record of names, not an official record of names. What do you call
It was a deed.
it? A deed,
Yeah.
a bill of sale. So
Bill of
we-
sale, so
Yeah,
bill of
a
sale.
bill of sale of enslaved, descendants on the Wallace, plantation. And so these were just names. Some had, birth dates, some had ages. And we saw this one name, Grief Wallace, Grief Wallace. And there was no more information. It may have been 28 years old, but there was no more information. Grief Wallace. And so immediately, you know, me and Elizabeth looked at each other like, oh, holy shit, yeah, you know. And me as a poet, I was like, Taylor, you know, goodness, you gotta, what's going on, you know? And we were already, Elizabeth and I through this process, I'm just gonna tell the truth, we were already turning over in all kinds of which ways as artists, you know, emotionally. And being in a very like heightened, like you were saying, you know, cultural, political, like everything that was happening. And so, Elizabeth mentioned like, that's the name for the dedication. This is who we're dedicating this work to, the process to, the sculpture to Grief Wallace. And also part of doing that was, okay, how I'm gonna come up with a poem or activate poetry into that space. Activate voice into the space, activate Grief Wallace into that space. And so through the intuitive work, coming up with a poem for grief, and kind of returning that word grief back to really what it means. You know, the joy of Grief Wallace lived. Grief Wallace resided. Grief Wallace is reclaimed. Grief Wallace, beautiful Grief Wallace. And so it just, you know, makes me almost want to cry now because we're just all over the place, but just reclaiming that name Grief. And when you go there Saturday, or if you ever go again, you'll be walking among grief, and grief will be right there with you.
She said she's an artist. She said she needs help.
I don't know why you all forget. Clap for work.
Now, Tony, I think one of the most profound pieces of sculpture or art I've seen before. Can you walk us to the Praise House and how'd you get there, and even the name?
Thank you first. I think I came up with the name, the title is Bearing Witness, Praise House, Sun Shadows. And, you know, also we must follow the rules, the visual language of art as we go as best as we can. Line, shape, color, texture, those things, as much as we can to just add layers of meaning to these things that we hope will be visually interesting and powerful as we go. I think one of the things I wanted to say with this Praise House structure, it's designed to use that family photograph almost in such a way that they're this family, a picture of an African-American family in front of their original church that had been burned down. I had it laser cut. You can still see the outline, so that it would also allow those shadows to be cast. I was just experimenting with that. You know how in the afternoon you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you're like 20 feet long, you know, like
Yes.
it'll stretch over. I wanted to take advantage of that possibility. So now it's been tricky. It was tricky to figure it out because it captures the sun near the setting of the day, near the sunset of the day, which is in the western sky. So I needed to orient this structure towards the west. So now every sunny day, when the sun is close to setting in the western sky, the sculpture evokes this resurrection ritual. by sending its light through the steel cut image of the church family at their Easter moment, casting a shadow along a broken white marble floor. We're so fortunate in Alabama sometimes because people are like, where do you get marble? Marble for us. Silicaga, as those of you who like to source marble for your projects. So Silicaga happens to just be like 18 miles down the road from Harpersville. How nice is that? Which also offers the possibility of including the legacy, the history of that region. And also there are some elements on the front, like especially the front porch that you'll see when you go out there, that are with the house from 1841. That to me, that suggests enslaved people could have, I'm not saying that they did, but sometimes when there was work to be done. But so that's, it can be to me sort of an interesting desire to use that material from that region. But this, I was able to gather all these broken white marble slabs to make a floor. And I like that white projection surface for the shadows, but also the brokenness of that surface seemed to also connect with the brokenness that happens when an African-American church is burned. And so there are two walls, one containing the steel cut image, but then the second wall has those false doors, a reference to the other photograph that I'd seen of the building. So it's possible on a perfectly good day when the leaves aren't blocking the sunset for the shadow to travel in its own time across the broken path of the floor and then up to the second wall, entering those doors. Sort of metaphorically, they made it back to their church, every day when the sun is. So I like, taking advantage of the natural elements of light and shadow to help to move within the sculpture.
Got one more question, then we'll move to like our Q&A. I'm really big on, I wonder, did the site pick you or you picked the site?
In terms of like that
Creativity.
for the,
Yeah, we know that they asked you to come do this, but like, did you feel like you was drawn to it? What made you say yes? And then when you got there, did it shift? Like, so ultimately did the site pick you? Was it divine intervention?
I was a hard maybe until until I really built relationships with the descendant community, and then it was absolutely. So I feel like the people picked.
The people picked you, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I had help with Peter Datcher. When you get to the site, you'll see how the land sort of slopes off as almost as there's this road, and it leads to, out to the field. There's still cotton growing. There was, at least by Sunday, they may have picked it already. I mean, with a machine.
We got you. We got you.
You got it.
Well, after Tuesday. But there's a structure on the plantation that they call the John Mallory House. I was calling it the overseer's house, but it wasn't really an overseer's house. It has the root cellar there. But he's got this, when you go into the house, he's got this little mason jar, like peephole, like, and when I thought it was the overseer's house, and I could slide the mason jars like on a little nail, and you slide it back, and there's a hole there. I thought that would be like a great line of sight to have the praise house down there originally, as if this was some sort of a surveillance thing going on. But by working with one of the members of the descendant community, Peter Datcher, helped me kind of pick a place that was appropriate. I wanted, when you're thinking about these praise houses and hush arbors, they tend to be wanting to be kind of located down in the woods somewhere, not far out of eyesight of the plantation, the overseers, but far enough away where the folks could have their own kind of private space. So I was happy that we could find a place that was way down. A lot of times people come out to the Wallace House and they give up. They're like, that's too far. But I wanted you to experience, it's not that far. I wanted you to experience the distance that people would have gone to go and gather. And I like that it's kind of close to that cotton field view as well. So combination of you and members of the community having the say in where a best site would be.
I would say ethereal, the place called me there. Yeah, tangibly, was invited in Elizabeth's process to collaborate with her. But I didn't want to go, it wasn't like, it was like, oh, let's go down to the plantation now. Let's go do some poetry in the plantation. It's like, it was that immediate feeling. And then, that immediate feeling, then it was the thought of poets look out into the future to beckon to the world about what they already know and see is out there through the intuitive space that they're knowing. Mm-hmm. And then beckon back towards the past to say, I see you too. I see that too. And so for me, every time I'm there, I do feel this presence with me of I'm there to witness and to be witnessed. So as a healer, I'm there healing, but also to be healed. And that's kind of hard as a community organizer who is the giver to know that there is some receiving in this space too, which really helps support me in the function and formality of the With Love for Grief poem, of putting repetition in that poem to remind myself and to remind grief and to remind the community of the threefold process of being called to a place, to being seen in a place, to being known in a place. So I think it was I think, of course, it was very tangible things that happened to get me there, but I think I needed to be there and they needed me there. And I always thought, and just with tears in my eyes, how many poets were on this space? How many visual artists? How many storytellers? There was one story as I was working and I was talking to one of the Black descendants who is in his 20s, and his grandmother, Miss Doris, told him a story of the love stories about how enslaved folks showed love for each other. They had lanterns at night, and the lanterns would go dark, and by the time the overseer or whomever would be asleep, they would light their lanterns with each other to show that they were saying, I love you. And I feel like every time I'm there are lanterns that are being lit. And I'm lighting, and they're lighting them for me. And it's kind of a self-care thing. Anything, you all are encouraging.
So last week I was at another moderated conversation, and I wanted to test this out with some creatives. And so what they did was, instead of a generic Q&A, you all have opportunity to ask your questions, but what they did was they let the panelists propose questions to the audience. And so I get to be Oprah, I get to do the pricing right and say, step on down. And so they're gonna propose, each of them gonna propose one question to anybody in the audience to come up and step up and answer it. And then we'll have our Q&A. There's no pressure. Remember, we're just in conversation with each other. So I was saying, last week, I witnessed a moderated conversation where the moderator asked the panelists to ask questions to the audience. And so this is like my whole question, you get a card, step on down the price right. To have one of you, somebody in the audience answer one of their questions to be part of the dialogue. No pressure, no pressure. And then we'll do that, and then we'll switch back to the generic Q&A, where you all get to ask your questions, your beautiful questions. So I'm not gonna point on you. This is really up to you to come down to be part of this conversation. So I'm gonna go over there. I'm gonna hold the mic. This is our moment together. So who wants to ask the first question?
Okay, so first of all, thank you all for spending this part of your busy Mid-South Sculpture Alliance time with us, and thank you very much for doing that. So my question is, what do you expect or hope to experience at sites rooted in trauma or traumatic experiences? What do you expect or hope to experience?
Got one step on it. Please just state your name
Hi, I'm Jody Farmer from Oklahoma, and I'm also a disabled veteran. So when you speak on what you expect from trauma, I think it's just to have that shared feeling or thought process, because things aren't going to change if other people can't feel it. And so that resonates with me and my work.
Thank you for your service.
Yes, question number 2. Who dreamed you here? Who are you the dream of? Who dreamed you here?
That is an artist profound question for sure. Who dreamed you here? Yes.
So,
Please.
Come on, Jen.
People may be able to hear you in the room.
Y'all, everyone, Jennifer McConnell, my friend, our friends. Why, Wallace, come on, Jennifer, we're gonna,
Who's gonna make everybody? That's it.
So I would ask this question because, my fear is that they couldn't dream. And I'm particularly in that space right now.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
And before I leave, I would love to read the poem, would love for grief and talk about that and give everyone one, just to support the trauma.
I want to know what is bringing you hope today.
Okay, now that. The possibilities that my ancestors did dream.
Come on, Jennifer. Come on. My sister.
Anybody else want to answer that question? Oh, I got 2 people. Step on down. We'll have you, and then we'll have you after. But please stay right there. Yeah. And I think the reason why I think we should have more people answer this question is it's a lot going on in the world today.
My name is Veronica Ibargüengoitia from University of North Texas. So I think empathy, educating in empathy and understanding in both sides, to be able to build a more equitable world, more understanding in which everyone is in the same level.
I sort of have an answer to all, or some ideas about some of the questions he asked, kind of like a hodgepodge answer, I guess. So I'm Olga, and I'm from Missouri State University. So I think what really gives me hope is that we have a space where I can kind of ask questions about where I'm from. Being Mexican in the Midwest is really difficult. And I'm really grateful that after what's going on in our country, that I don't know why I'm getting so emotional.
It's fine, take your time. Take your time.
Thanks. Okay. Being able to just question what my identity is and using artwork to kind of answer those questions, and also just be inspired by like past, like generational trauma and how artists here are working on that and asking the same questions I have is really important to me. So I'm really proud to be Latina, but at the same time, I'm really grateful that I have a place to share my struggle with that, and just bring up topics that we may be like familiar with or want to avert from, like migration, border, all of that good juicy stuff. So in my grad program, I definitely tackle those issues for me and how I see myself represented in this space. So, yay us.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm Cecilia. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama, but I'm currently at University of South Carolina, and getting my master's, whatever. So anyway, what gives me hope is that my kids are so empathetic and just showing them the different places and things and getting their view on it, because they're looking at it through like a totally different lens. And so to get that feedback when I'm making art, I'm viewing it from my Gen X, brain. They're viewing it from this totally different area of like, the different, electronics and, just a vastly different and more open world than that we grew up in. And so like, it gives me hope to hear their spin on stuff. And like, when I add it into my work, it just makes it even better. And so like, Trump can do whatever he wants to do, but we gonna do better. So I'm just like,
Thank you.
My name is Nadine. I'm from at the University of North Texas. What gives me hope is, despite the complete erasure of their humanity by most of the world, my Palestinian brothers and sisters, and seeing them kind of embrace their humanity every day and just continue to do things that are trying to be deprived of them, just engaging in regular family activities. That
Hi, I'm Valerie Rudden, coming from Rochester Institute of Technology. The thing that gives me hope is spaces like Wallace House, or places where artists and people who want to reconcile their past, whatever it is, can come together and talk about it, acknowledge it, come to terms with it, and support each other.
Thank you for indulging me in that. Now we can actually ask them questions. Does anyone have any questions for them? Yes, sir. For everybody here, or you can use what I say, your museum voice. Your museum voice.
Those that know me, my name is Dr. Brian Massey. I'm the department chair at the University of Central Arkansas in Cullman, Arkansas. This is my question for the panel. We have such a dynamic rich history amongst Black Americans. What would you do to enhance other states in the South to do what you're doing?
I would, thank you, Professor Massey. I would just encourage them, we're working on creating websites for, specifically for Praise Houses and shamelessly. Tell them.
Put the plug out there.
Check out, for so far, Praise. Praisehouse.art.
Next.
No, That's mine.
Okay.
Mine is praisehouse.art. Come see if you can find it.
Thank you so much, Professor Massey. I would say, hire us, bring us in, we get this stuff. But honestly, working with, I think this team of interdisciplinary artists, who are also cultural workers and looking at the interior of community to support the exterior of community, really working with those folks who are already working in those spaces, and then really asking the question of what are we wanting to dream up in these spaces? What are we wanting this dream of this space to look like? What are we really envisioning? But really, what are we dreaming up for those spaces? And there's some folks who are really doing that, I think, as well. And I think in other states, looking at your space, your places of what do you call it? Places where people are reconciling, well, there's a new word for it now. But places where you already know that museums or civil rights spaces or historic spaces or plantation homes or what have you. And really thinking about what are the creative ways we can bring ritual experiential learning into those spaces, and who are the people who are already doing that in other states as a preeminent tool to support advocacy and education and historical narrative generation.
Yeah, I would say that artists and organizers are everywhere, and this particular example of a place was really started by people who were interested in doing something different, and I think people like that exist everywhere, and I think that is just about finding those folks and building community with them.
Y'all talked a fair amount about negotiating with institution along deadlines and product and process. Could you all talk a little bit more about what those negotiations look like practically, and the role of dignity in your processes and your product?
Yes, we actually, Elizabeth and I did a session on designing for dignity early on in this process, really and coming and doing a practice of what designing for dignity could possibly look like, and talking about this before the sculpture or anything was even put hand to ground. And also the dignity of all parties involved, including ancestors, living descendants, artists, community and cultural workers, and the community at large, business, whoever else, the municipalities and all those different things. So I think, first of all, working with the organization who had this vision for this to happen and who had this funding, and sometimes you have funding and then let's get the vision, right? So it's having these two things together and coming together to talk about, okay, what does the community want, number one? And how do we access that? Is that a community conversation? Is that community dialogue? Have you already done the community organizing work? So if you're as an artist going into space and doing this kind of regenerative work, the question to ask is, okay, who are your community, and what's your relationship in tangent with that community? Who are the community, who are the leaders who are leading your organization from the community or are part of the community? Do they really want art? Do they want a poem? Do they want, this space? So having those set tones of questions as an organization is kind of tangibly how it begins to kind of look as well. Having the questions also of, as a poet in residence, this is the type of poetry that I do for Reformation poetry. I do revival poetry, reclamation poetry. And these are the definitions of that. Will that fit into your project and your timeline? Because it will be a process. And this is the defining narrative that I work from. So having those conversations. Then there's the funding conversation, of course, you have with yourself when you're looking at, and have with them as you're looking at, is it a grant? Is it a budget? Or is this a fundraising? Is this part of, a private donorship, and those kinds of questions, and the deadlines, which I don't do deadlines, and I have my editor for my book is like, that's why I'm here, because she doesn't do it. I gotta come in and make her write this book, But having those deadlines are important, but I will end with this. What is supportive as an artist is having a collaborative team with you. Lots of times, it's solo, right? Solo dolo, especially as an oratory artist who does storytelling, and my art is my voice. So it's not like I'm resourcing materials or other people to come help me. So me and Elizabeth working together and talking to an organization saying, hey, Tony has done this, he's done some community building, me and Elizabeth are co-creators. What does that look like to do that, and how would that funding look?
I had what you're saying, Salaam, reminded me of how I was so fortunate. Sometimes when we're doing this work, these happy moments just happen. My mother would say, things being divinely ordered. You know, they just kind of fall into place. I was looking for some assistance to create some CAD drawings for the beginning of the Braves House. And there was this kid, I think he was a graduate of Rural Studio working here, Dylan. He works here at Creature Builds, architectural firm. And he said, well, yes, I can do CAD drawings, but in a way there's a legal document. So, you know, you have to get permission from my boss. So I put together a PowerPoint pitch. I went to his boss. And by the time I was done with the conversation, he was like, look, I support this. We've got we've got a shop over there, you know, down the street from me. I can't think of the Fifth Avenue somewhere on Birmingham. Apple Shop, is it? Apple Shop, I think that's the name of that may not be the name. Apple Shop, I think. It's a full carpentry space for them to do kind of the fine tuning of things that they need to do on the architectural stuff that they're doing. He said, anything in that shed that you need, this building you need, you just have. And he had all these boards of the red wood that all the tiger wood. I thought it was the golfer, but this Brazilian wood that I could use to make up most of the Braves House. So it's networking with people who have, you know, coming up, like you're saying, with budgets, but then what are some of, a lot of times I think, you know, if you make pitch to people with materials, they might be willing to help you with that. So don't give up. Go back 3 times. If the person's not there, just keep back to this. It's give you the materials that you need. And also grants. Get those grants in, learn to write them, get them in. And I would, last thing I'll say is that I'm enjoying these organizations of like-minded individuals. There's an organization called CCAC, Southeastern Conference on Art Colleges, and they have artist fellowship, 5,000. So, I mean, I know the competition is there, but 2020, I won that. And that gave me the seed money to kind of get started with this project.
Yeah, I would say that the one sort of, not the one of the positive things about this particular organization is that there is this fundamental desire for healing and doing some of this work, and there is an acknowledgement that it's not easy. And so there, during some of our negotiations, and actually even prior to when Salaam got there, it was always sort of like, there was at least this common kind of goal that there was just slightly different approaches and slightly different timelines, slightly different pressures and senses of urgency. And so it was always kind of about coming back to the common goal, and maybe I, you know, write a little project proposal that helps them do something that they need to do. Maybe they give me a little more time, whatever. There was a moment before Salaam joined that reached a point where I was ready to step away from the project if certain things didn't happen. And I think that was a moment where it was like, oh. And so then we were able to move forward from that, which was positive. But then ultimately, I mean, I think that, yeah, again, like people are trying to do the same thing ultimately, and so that was a positive thing that we could kind of come together on, and then once there was this sort of vision of a product, that made everything a lot easier.
Take one more question.
Hey, I'm Celeste. I'm based in Alabama, in Birmingham, at Alabama School of Fine Arts. So maybe I'll see some of you there this Friday. Thank you. I was curious about how long it took for this whole project to happen. Like after this experience, like how long did it take, do you think, for a community building to happen? And also, how do you see the project evolving in the coming years? How does this space get utilized in the future?
I can, thanks for your question, Celeste. Again, I came up with the idea around after the time I'd seen the Wyman Davis performers early 2020, then I applied for this CCAC grant. That was funded in 2020. And then it took about 2 years after that, a combination of community building, site selection and materials. So it took about, it took me about 2 years before I was ready before we broke ground. In the middle of all this though, fortunately, there's a production company here in Dallas, maybe you all know about 1504.co, Tyler Jones. They decided to make a documentary about my making of the film, of the Praise House. So that was kind of a nice touch, to go along with this.
My contribution on the project with Elizabeth probably was 3 years, maybe 2.5 years, somewhere on that, and it was coming in on after, like Elizabeth said, she'd been there a while as well. So the community engagement or community building or whatever was most definitely at the speed of care and very much care. And Elizabeth, of course, has been there before myself and done a lot of connective work and introduction work, which is kind of the beginning if you're new to community being invited in. And myself coming in and being able to kind of like support on that was the other part of that as well. The actual like production of the poems and the poetry and all of those things, of course, they were based on the community. They were based on the community work. So I did not do any of that until after, and not until that care had been reconciled there, and that was time to do that. But Elizabeth can talk more about the longevity of that project as well.
Yeah, I attended the first homecoming celebration that they had in 2018. And then was probably the sort of the beginnings of the invitation began kind of there or shortly thereafter, maybe 2019. And then and so that's when it started meeting with folks just on porches and just build, casually chatting with people about what they were interested in. And then the pandemic certainly slowed the process a lot, also just because of
because of the pandemic.
Yeah, and then I think we kind of 2021 is when we started being able to do more group organizing things. So and what it's 2024 now, so a while.
Yeah. 6 years on. Yeah.
And this is my last question, and then we're ending with your piece. You heard empathy, you heard hope, you heard future. We're in a room with brilliant creators. What do you want to leave them with when it comes to empathy, hope, resilience, transformation? I mean,
Sorry, You know, many of us would like to love, how many of you all love to visit a real antebellum plantation? You know, isn't that, I mean, that's not on your list of top things to do, but aren't you curious about that? That part of our American experience? And many times if you're fortunate enough to get to such a place, you know, you're left with that heavy history of what that place was all about. But at least here at the Wallace House, there's this counterbalance of other kinds of ways of interpreting that history. So I'm glad that we were able to be, you know, have a place that's willing to host our work, like, you know, eternally. Actually, that's a super permanent collection there. So it's kind of, it's a thing we can always go by and visit. I was there just this weekend. Everything's looking good. You know, it's good to have, and maybe the young people that were a part of this process, they'll also, as they mature, you know, they'll be able to tell their friends and kids about this thing. It's a nice legacy we have done.
Yeah, I think just a reminder that as cultural producers, each of us does have power and agency, and there's also so much power in community building. And those relationships are, when they're real, they can be so beautiful, and strong. And that is the kind of thing that I think is, you know, ultimately in times like this, that's what we lean on, and that's what moves us to a future period. But yeah, and I mean, also throughout this process, like there were so many people who engaged with it in different ways, even like the folks at SLOSS too. I mean, talking to them about what it was like to handle the physical wood and the pouring of the metal, and thinking about the meaning behind the process too. It was really beautiful to learn from them and how it impacted them too. So there were so many hands that touched that particular project, and so many minds were part of it too. So I guess just the power of the collective.
Yes, and so I'll just end with the poem With Love for Grief, and if you would like a copy, we have a copy as you walk out as well. And I would like for you to think about what your With Love poem would be today. With love for grief. Dear grief, did you know you were a poet, a magician, a living, breathing gift to the universe? Do you know? Dear grief, do you realize that millions of years of love and war and birth and death and phenomenon beyond your reasoning all conspired to deliver you? Do you know? Dear grief, you are not metaphorically, not conceptually, but actually and literally a miracle. Do you know? Do you know how miraculous it is that you exist? Seriously, do you know? Dear grief, today we step back and take in the totality of your existence. You are literally a creation of divine proportion, a promise of eternal perfection on this plane of earth. Do you know? Dear grief, are you listening? Can you hear this? I hope you do. I love you. We love you. Your family. Thank you.
Like to thank the panel and make a quick announcement. So this is so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your thoughts. And I just appreciate it so much. For everybody here, we're going to have a lunch break. Guys, we're gonna go eat. We're gonna fill ourselves with food. There's lots of places within walking distance. If you open that folded brochure that was in your welcome pack,
there's recommendations of places that are within walking distance, little walking men, okay, or walking person, I should say. This afternoon, we're gonna come back together again at Sloss Furnaces. Okay, Sloss Furnace, there's a parking lot there. Okay, it's free to park there, you can park there.